Hello, everyone. It's May 2nd, 2024 on a Thursday. We are here meeting on behalf of the CAPZ user community. CAPZ is a part of the Cluster API community. We're a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, and we abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct. So please be respectful to other voices, raise hands before speaking. We welcome all voices and let's have some fun. So without further ado, at the beginning of each meeting, we like to take a second to allow anyone to introduce themselves, whether you're new or have any reason whatsoever. Please, if you'd like to say hi, now's your chance. I'll pause and allow anyone to raise hands.
I'm trying to raise hands and I'm like I don't
It's
use
all
Zoom.
right. Go. You have permission to
Okay.
permission to have the con.
Thank you very much, Jack. I think this is the second time that I'm joining this office hours. So my name is Vineet Agrawal, and I'm working with one of the customers who is implementing CAPI and CAPZ for their AKS cluster management. So I've been leading a team of engineers, Kubernetes engineer and Azure engineers to build that infrastructure for the customers. So the reason that I'm here is like in the last couple of weeks, we have been doing internal POCs, and then we figured it out few of the limitations, or maybe some kind of suggestion that we can get your help there, like some kind of strategies. So that's the reason I'm here, and I have actually listed down the issues that we are facing in the open discussion section. So once we reach there, once we get there, like I'll have some time. I like to discuss all those points that where we are facing some limitations or problem with CAPI and CAPC.
Wonderful. Thanks for introducing yourself. Thank you. David, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Jack. I've actually been to one of these meetings, I think maybe a month or two ago. Just popping in again just to see what's going on, what's new, and then also I had a small question about subnets that I figured I could ask here.
Cool.
Oh, and I'm working with a company that helps set up Kubernetes clusters for customers. So we've been playing around with CAPC as an abstraction on that.
Great. All right. Welcome, Vineet and David. Welcome back to both of you, actually, it sounds like. All right, let's go to the agenda. Who wants to announce CAPC patch releases?
We have new patch releases.
Thank you, Matt. We have new patch releases. Go get your new patch releases.
Yeah, minor bug fixes, but the bigger news that we maybe should have listed here is we're hoping to do a minor release next week, which will be great.
Yep. So it'll be 1:15 next week. We could talk about that.
Yep.
And without further ado, let's just have Vineet. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. So as I mentioned that we have been doing our internal POCs before we get to the final implementations. So there are a couple of questions that we need to figure it out. Like, what's the CAPI and CAPZ support for AKS backup? Is there a way we can CAPI can be or CAPZ can be integrated with any backup solutions for AKS? We were evaluating Valero, but I don't know, is there any add-ons integration with CAPZ? Right now, CAPZ seems to be, the management cluster seems to be a single point of failure. And is there any strategy to mitigate that particular risk in production environment? The team was facing some issues while downgrading the cluster version. So, upgrading the cluster version is working. But if, let's say, we need to downgrade the cluster version, Kubernetes cluster version through CAPZ, they are facing some challenges. That's something that I need some guidance here. And also, what are the best practices for GitOps integration? Like in my understanding, we can use GitOps for managing the entire life cycle of any of the cluster created through management clusters. Yeah. So let's say I use management cluster, CAPI management cluster to create one AKS cluster. And if I need to manage the life cycle, let's say upgrading the version of that particular Kubernetes clusters and all, how can the best practices or any documentation around GitOps integration, that will be helpful.
Okay, great. These are all great. I feel like we can talk to all four of these. So let's just, do you mind if we go in order? I'll add a few remarks on AKS backup. So there is no native support for AKS backup. I actually am unfamiliar. Does AKS have its own first class backup feature? I assume the answer is no. Is that your experience also, Vineet? And I can
Yeah.
get more
Yes.
clarity on that.
Yeah, they do.
Okay. Okay, great. So there's no native CAPI and CAPC support for backup. I don't want to say authoritatively, but my sense is that that would not be in scope for the Cluster API project. So your use of like best practice tools in the industry like Blero is probably that makes sense. And
Okay.
what I would do is like in the near term, I would run through some like DR type scenarios where, so for one thing, there is sort of like a backup in terms of configuration that you get natively by using Cluster API. So the scenario you'd want to run through is, have a secure place to store your source of truth in terms of your cluster configuration, build a new cluster, mutate some of the actual operational state on that cluster that's outside of the scope of Cluster API and CAPC.
Yeah.
So that CAPC's source of truth still, like its goal state is still in agreement with the operational state. So, it's going to be things like in the Kubernetes application layer or whatever.
Got it.
And then execute a backup and then delete the cluster.
Yeah.
Have CAPC recreate the cluster from scratch and then execute a restore. And
Got it.
I would go through that workflow and see what level of fidelity you get in terms of restoring your previous cluster. So
Sure.
the basic cluster configuration state is going to be fine. Like CAPC will rebuild that cluster at the same desired Kubernetes version. All the other AKS features, like it's going to get recreated to be a new cluster using the desired configuration. But the backup stuff in terms of like restoring workloads and other operational states in that cluster is outside of the scope of Cluster API. And so you're going to want to run through that workflow and see.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Willie, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I've just did a quick search and it looks like there's like a backup extension, like an AKS extension. So, and we do have support for AKS extensions in CAPZ. So I'm thinking that there might be a way to do this through that. And I'm not super familiar with it, but I can I think it might be in scope if we can get the extension to work. Just a page that I was reading. So I don't think it's like out of the question, but it's just we're not sure if this will work. And I'm not sure if this
Go ahead,
is like
David.
exactly what you
Oh,
need.
sorry.
David.
Please finish, Willie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've spoken to the Azure backup team, and I know there's at least some acknowledgement of like the ASO integration. So I'd have to see where the status of that is, but obviously that correlates to a similar kind of concept of CAPC. So yeah, this would be an Azure backup team thing, not or an AKS backup team thing, not like CAPZ per se. But all that said, I mean, your point about GitOps is absolutely very relevant here, because theoretically, right, if you're, well, yeah, I'll just say, if your definitions of your clusters are all in Git, and you have GitOps agent syncing that to cluster to CAPZ, that should be enough to restore even if your management cluster gets blown away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Assuming that you don't do any mutating webhooks. So if you don't have anything that Cluster API does the mutation of those webhooks with your configuration, then cluster can go away, can come back. It's all in Git. It'll just get recreated, and you should be good to go. Right? That's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah, the only caveat would be stateful applications. There's some additional hygiene you would need to do and rigor to stage out those, because that's a little bit more complicated.
Well, yeah. I'm saying I'm saying the management cluster itself, not the workload clusters, right?
Yeah.
Speaking to Willie's suggestion about the AKS backup extension, my fear about that is that the actual functionality of that might require a full cluster rebuild, which would then sort of orphan that from CAPZ management. And so you want to definitely see how the backup restore functionality works with that extension. Can you restore onto an existing cluster, or does it require you to create the cluster from scratch, in which case that might not play well with CAPZ and Cluster API. But that's a great suggestion. Okay. I'm happy to go back and forth between, but I'm just going to start by going in order here. So CAPZ management cluster is a single point of failure. Yes, the low hanging fruit response to that, from my perspective, is that the Kubernetes cluster architecture itself designs for mitigating this problem, in the sense that a cluster is a distributed system. And so you shouldn't lose your cluster. However, having something like GitOps or some other infrastructure as code source of truth that can create the sort of primitive configurations that would create a cluster from scratch, if, for example, you somehow lost your control plane, should be the final thing. But what are the operational scenarios that would result in an entire cluster being lost?
Maybe let's say that the machine or the AKS environment, let's say, where they have this AKS cluster is destroyed, like the entire region is down, where the management cluster is there, something like that. Like hypothetically, that entire region is down, all the VMs are down for Azure.
Right.
That particular, yeah.
Okay, so let's game through a few scenarios. So in the case of catastrophic failure, either human error or actual Azure infrastructure, you're going to rely on your backup of cluster state. So something's backing up etcd, so you can so as those backup snapshots are taken, you'll be able to restore the cluster using some process in the future, using the latest etcd snapshot. And so now you should be able to recreate that cluster from scratch, and have a CAPZ management cluster that is now back enforcing your fleet of workload clusters at the goal state that was taken at the time of that backup snapshot. So if certain operational mutations had taken place since that cluster went down and was restored in the workload clusters, the management cluster is now going to overwrite those. So that's like a possible practical scenario. Let's say it takes 2 weeks to get your management cluster back online, and in those 2 weeks you've manually moved those clusters forward to a new version of Kubernetes because of a CVE or something like that. When you bring your management cluster back online, there's going to be a temporary race between the changes that you've made in operations and the state of things as the management cluster knew at the time of the last backup. So that's one possible scenario. Obviously, a simple scenario, like if you're running a management cluster and you scale it out to, like, say 5 control plane nodes, and you're running 3 availability zones, and an availability zone drops, so you lose 1 or 2 VMs, your cluster is still going to be fine. You're going to be running at reduced capacity and operational capability until those availability zones come back online and those additional nodes come back online, but you're okay. Okay. In a catastrophic case where you're not backing up your management cluster and your management cluster goes away, your workload clusters are still going to exist. They're going to be orphaned. So they're now they're under manual management. So is this helping to inform some thoughts about how you can?
So I'm just talking about the worst case scenario. So the scenario that you mentioned, where we have a multiple control nodes and all, that's great. So let's say that the management cluster is totally gone, and then all the worker nodes or worker clusters are orphaned for some time. we recreate the new management clusters. At that point, what are the process for integrating those worker clusters with the new management clusters? Is
Well,
there any?
if it's a one-to-one snapshot backup of the state that they were lost and the workload clusters, nothing has changed on the workload clusters.
Yeah.
The process is literally just restore that management cluster, and the
Okay.
privileged communications will be restored because all the key exchange, all that kind of scaffolding,
Yeah.
is ultimately rendered as data that's now been brought back online. And so now the secret kube configs that are stored on the management cluster that permit access to the workload clusters, those
Yeah.
are integral, and now communication is happening again. And so it should,
Got it.
and this is something that you should definitely game out and validate for yourself. But
Okay.
does anybody else want to add any thoughts on any of this? Okay, cool. So yes, it's definitely not untrue that the management cluster is a single point of failure. But the cluster itself as a unit is a distributed system. And so there's a lot of layers of defense there until you get to total cluster failure. Go ahead, Matt.
Just this kind of rang a bell with the meeting we had just gotten out of, where they asked the same question. And but something they were asking for, and maybe we should still keep this in mind, maybe this would be useful, is a set of like hardening recommendations for the management cluster. If we can come up with any, I don't know we have any, but that seems like a good document for us to brainstorm on.
That's right. Yes, because you could, another way to phrase this is that a CAPC management cluster is a single attack vector that has a lot of power.
Yep.
Okay, does CAPC support downgrade or rollback? So let's talk about, are we talking about CAPZ version rollback and cluster API version rollback, or so you're running CAPC primarily for AKS, right? Just you're not doing
Yes.
self-managed. Cool. So
No,
are we talking AKS rollback?
Yes, AKS rollback. Yeah.
I actually don't know the AKS features support for upgrade or rollback from AKS or from CAPC. Can anyone else chime in on this? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I would just say that I don't exactly know what the policy is either, but I think overall what we want to do in CAPZ is let you do anything that both Cluster API and AKS allow you to do. So if you find that AKS documents that, like, yes, you can downgrade by one minor version or something like that, and you can't do that in CAPZ, we would be interested in trying to make that possible.
Okay, awesome. That's great. I'll try to do some POC on that.
Yeah, so I'll reinforce that message. Ultimately, what CAPC is doing is just sending well-formed API requests to the AKS API under the hood. And so, like, if AKS allows you to go from, say, 1.29.1 to 1.29.0,
Yeah.
CAPC should be formulating that request as an API payload that AKS accepts, and it should just go do that work.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Best practices for GitOps integration. Looks like David is no longer here. So we have one person in the project who is working in earnest on this. But I can definitely speak through things at a high level. So
David's still here.
Oh, David's still here. I couldn't see him. Oh, there's a down arrow. Would you like, I'll pass it over to David. So David can just talk for a while, or you can ask targeted questions, but I'll hand the floor over to David to own this conversation.
I mean, I think the only really like caveat, like I mentioned, is the state factor, right? And I do have an open issue on this, on the way to develop, see if you do any mutating webhook things, but
Mhm.
but I've done this personally quite a bit where, just locally, I do actually have even a cluster in production, and my management cluster, I just, I have it all in source code, the cluster definition and the management cluster setup, and management cluster goes away. I bring it back, and then, I'm able to synchronize the cluster. And I know John even has an article right now on adopting kind of existing AKS clusters into management. I know that's not GitOps, but kind of, because ideally people, want to eventually manage multiple clusters at scale. You're going to want to have that definition that's there, and you want to have it bring it on board to the CAPZ management cluster and the overall GitOps workflow. So I mean, but yeah, I have a sample repo that I'm planning to make public in a bit that uses Argo CD and CAPZ together.
Awesome. When do you think, David, you will be able to make it public?
My goal is within the next month here, get it
Yes.
live.
Okay, awesome. And David, you also mentioned that there's some documentation around this integration GitOps.
I mean, there's lots of stuff on GitOps in general. I
No,
don't.
no, specifically to cluster API.
Well, there is one document which is that I have that's on the cluster API book, and that's really just more of how to use your workload clusters, how to bootstrap those. I guess you could use it for your management cluster too, but how to bootstrap the install of Argo CD with the CapH provider. So we have a cluster API provider for Helm. And so then there's the document, I can link to it, or if somebody can paste it in there, of how to, automatically install Argo CD using the Helm chart, and configure it as soon as, after the cluster gets created.
Yeah. So it will be really, really helpful, David, if you can paste the link of that particular document. I know that the CAPZ book, I will review the CAPZ book, but the document that you mentioned, if there is any other document that if you feel is relevant, will be very helpful.
Yep. Yeah,
I'll add one best practice, and that would be to optimally allow only your GitOps actor privileged write access to the management cluster, so that you aren't in a situation, because this is worth emphasizing, because in all the documents that you're going to read around cluster API, it's all about how wonderful it is to be Kubernetes native with your. So in a way, it is infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
And your code is the Kubernetes resource definitions on your cluster. So when you're adding GitOps as the sort of authority for moving changes into that, you want to make sure that that becomes the only actor that can actually make those changes on the Kubernetes cluster.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, great. Now I do have one more request, and again I can check that internet. Is there any document that compares cluster API with Terraform, especially the Terraform part where you can use Terraform for Kubernetes management on any of the cloud provider?
I'm not aware of an article comparing the two, although I could
Yeah, we could speak to those.
I could speak to it. I mean,
I think GitOps, I would say GitOps is actually, so the traditional comparison between Terraform and something like Cluster API would be a difference between infrastructure as code and a continual reconciliation source of truth that Cluster API provides. And GitOps kind of bridges those worlds, because you have the infrastructure as code that's statically canonically represented, but then you have a actor, now it's Cluster API, that's acting on behalf of that infrastructure as code continuously to make sure that goal state is
Yeah.
reconciled. Whereas in a Terraform or like a Chef or a Puppet world, you have a sort of finite life cycle during which goal state is achieved. And then once goal state is achieved, things like close up shop and we go back and we don't do anything more until the goal state definition has changed. So cluster API is different in that the assessment of goal state achievement is continual. It's there's there are watchers that are happening. There are like timed intervals. And if goal state ever deviates, then that is cleaned up right away by cluster API. In something like Terraform, that would have to be manually, you have to manually induce a goal state sanity check. Go ahead, David, I'll let you.
Yeah, I was just gonna piggyback on what you're saying. Terraform also just by nature is not really designed to work in a continuous reconciliation loop, because you do have like the state file, local or even remote, and there's some advantages to that model, but it's not super friendly on the GitOps side of things. There is a GitOps provider for Terraform, but it's I mean, it just inherently on the engineering side of things has its own challenges trying to work in that way. Whereas when you're using like Azure Service Operator or CapZ, right, where Kubernetes is designed to work really well with this continuous reconciliation loop.
Okay.
I mean, another example I like to give is it's kind of like PowerShell versus PowerShell DSC, right? PowerShell, you can provision the code, but if you use PowerShell DSC, you're sitting there continually ensuring that the state is exactly, what it should be, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty much the question that I have right now.
Great. Yep. Thanks for all
Thanks.
that content. You're in the right place.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Okay, should we do a little bit of 115 pre-release prep? So 115 is due next week. Go ahead, John. Are you muted or is it me? Can anybody else hear John?
Oh, sorry, my bad.
You're good. I hear you now.
Did we want to address David Townley's question about subnets that I don't know if we added that to the agenda?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Somehow my brain garbage collected itself. Go ahead, David. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think I honestly may have just answered my own question by looking at docs, but maybe I can just make sure I have this right. So we were just facing some IP exhaustion in the subnet that we created for our managed cluster. And so it looks like AKS has docs for creating a new subnet, and then I guess you just need to create a new node pool and attach that subnet to that node pool. And it looks like the managed machine pool has a field for the subnet. So is it the case that if you don't provide that subnet name, it just defaults to the control plane subnet that you created, and then otherwise you can just pick whatever subnet you want? I guess one, is that true? And then two, is there a way for me to manage an extra subnet that I create through CapZ, or do I need to create that separately and just remember on my end the name that I've created?
Yeah, so I think I can't remember exactly how it behaves if I think CapZ only creates one subnet for you by default, and it puts all the node pools in that subnet. And if you wanted to create another subnet, you would have to do that like in the portal or some other way. There's no way in the CapZ API to express create another subnet, but then you should still be able to create another managed machine pool and then tag that subnet for that machine pool. I will throw in one plug for some new API things that I'm working on, where this would be possible where you could specify another subnet. So I will throw a link in chat to that in case that might be interesting. It's kind of new flavor of API stuff. So that might be helpful for this.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Thank you.
There's the subtext there, John, that the current CAPZ AKS API doesn't support this AKS feature, and the new CAPZ AKS API natively supports all of AKS's feature set. Is that why this doesn't exist right now in CAPZ?
I think it's not that there's like a specific AKS feature here. It's more that currently a Azure managed control plane can only create one subnet, and it doesn't know how to manage more than one subnet. But this new flavor of APIs.
But the ASO equivalent of that, if we're just using ASO does know how to do that.
Right. Yep.
Cool. So sorry if that was too inside baseball, David. So
No, I
ASO,
thought that makes sense.
are you familiar with Azure Service Operator?
Yeah, not in practice yet, but very soon.
Cool, yeah. So that's like a native CRD representation of the Azure API surface area, which will be. So if we can start talking about 115, that an experimental new API of AKS that uses ASO natively will be introduced with 115 next week.
Oh, awesome. And will this, like if I create a subnet before that's out or before I upgrade to 115, I can adopt it, I imagine, with ASO.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. This looks great. Thank you.
All right, page break. Okay, anyone, before we get to milestone type stuff, anyone have any ad hoc agenda items, any commentary on what we've discussed up to this point? Okay, cool. Do we have a link here for milestone review? Yay. Okay, so the most important thing is that V115 is scheduled for next week. So it would probably make sense to just go ahead and prune this list to only achievable items, and or consider delaying 115 if some of the items here we really want to land with 115, but won't be finished realistically the next week. So I'll just go down this hopefully quickly. I feel like I'm tangentially aware of this. This is almost ready, Matt, so we'll keep this in the list. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, there's some work to do, but I think I'll be able to do it. Let's leave it there.
Cool. This sounds complicated just by the title, so I'm going to go ahead and we can do multiples, right? Yeah. So I will go ahead and tag that and move that out. Certainly something like that won't happen in the next few dev days.
The
Who can
next
speak
one
to
is
this?
I'm assigned to that, and I don't think I'm going to actually as defined there. I don't think I'm going to finish at this milestone.
Okay, cool.
If you
Kick this out. Bump it to the next one, John.
Yes. I think if we find that we need that, we can classify it as a bug fix and backport.
Okay, cool. And ditto for this.
Yes, I think we should bump that too.
And we can actually, can we talk about this really quick? David, did you go to Cappy yesterday?
I
David?
did, yeah.
Did you get any
So,
feedback?
so the feedback I got was open to having a generalized Helm chart repo, but basically suggest you create your own repo and get other people to contribute to it and then donate it. That was the feedback I got.
Okay.
So um, I, that's fine. I mean, so I guess if that's what we want to trend path we want to pursue, that's a, I guess, a general green light there, but I don't, yeah, there's still, I would say there's, in some sense, there could be more work with that than this option. But I get that this has its own implications, so it's fine to.
Okay, cool.
talk
Well,
about.
yeah, we can keep talking about that. That actually sounds encouraging to me. So maybe we can come up with a plan.
Okay. Yep. So yeah, I think you can kick it off there, off the milestone at least. That's fine.
Okay, this doesn't look like, so I'm just going to check it. I don't think. I assume because it's size XL, it's not going to happen. But should we prioritize this like in the coming weeks to do this? Or is this is this also provided with, is this a native AKS feature that would be provided with the V2 API?
Yeah, I just need to, like I said, I just need to test again. So I would just leave it as is, and we'll probably just close it.
Great. We'll kick it to, well, we can do that during the next release cycle. Awesome.
So just
Willie, do you have any, I know you've been looking at this. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's just I'm just waiting on reviews, I think, and also just doing some testing. I was running into some issues with like bring your own VNet on this, but I tried to test it on main and I was also having the same issue, so I don't think it was issue with the uppercase. So I think it's at a place where it could be reviewed, and I'm just testing it with a bunch of edge cases because there's a lot of different resources that could have the capital letters, and I don't want there to be any like instances where CAPZ thinks something is one name while it's actually the converted name. And because we're supporting this, there's like a disconnect between the name and ASO, name of the resource in ASO, and in Azure if it has like unsupported characters. So yeah, that's just
okay, cool. I'm going to kick this off because it sounds kind of super dangerous to me, but I'm also naive in terms of all the work that you've done so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's not dangerous in the sense that it'll break anything existing because we never supported this like before.
Well, I mean, dangerous in the sense that we would start supporting it and people would then have critical production infrastructure that they think has an uppercase name, but AKS doesn't, because AKS doesn't actually allow that. So that's dangerous to me.
Wait, the AKS doesn't allow capital letters? Or like Kubernetes doesn't allow it?
Oh, sorry. The inverse of what I said. It's dangerous to allow people to run critical infrastructure where they manage it according to a configuration at the name property vector that disagrees with the underlying AKS name. That's
I mean,
dangerous.
The cluster name is still going to be enforced because of metadata.name field. But anything like you can specify just within the CAPZ spec itself, like resource group or VNet name or just like anything like that. Those used to like work with capital letters, but now they're backed by ASO resources. So it won't be like the whole cluster is going to be like the name is different, but just individual like resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. I would love to just defer Russia on this because it still seems dangerous to me.
Yeah, I just need some testing and people to look at it, I think. It's a lot, yeah.
Go ahead, John.
And that's also a bug that we could backport to if we aren't super confident about that in time for the release.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good call out. Okay, have I seen you work on this, Matt?
Yeah, that's just formatting and grammar stuff. If somebody else wants to review it, Willie thought it was good to go. Well,
okay, we'll keep it in then. And
the last one is the same as the first one, so they should.
Yep. All right. Oh my goodness.
Oh no. Oh good.
Oh, look at that. Wow. Thank you, Safari. Okay, so I've got my selects. What do I do?
Yeah.
What's that?
Sorry.
Is it because there's no other milestone? Is there no V next? Or is it because I don't actually have these selected? I don't trust that these are actually all selected. Sorry, I know this is being recorded. That's painful.
It worked for a second there.
Yeah, but I as a former front-end engineer, I don't trust that the underlying DOM representation is what we think it is. All right, so I'm going to say, I don't know why there's a minus, but does this move it to next? Yes. Okay, great. All right, that seems achievable between now and Tuesday or something. So the next thing is to go and maybe pre-tag. Just let's do a quick sanity check and what's in flight. I'm gonna not go in strict order. I'm gonna go to things I know we can quickly come to a consensus on. This I've been working on for the last couple of weeks. It's basically ready, but I would prefer that it's not really code, but I would prefer that we just do this during the next release milestone. So I'm going to tag this with next, unless someone has concerns. If you have concerns, please speak up now. Cool. And so we'll do a bunch of CI hygiene during the 1.16 release cycle. We'll update. We'll use that to inform further doc updates. I know that this has already probably informed some doc updates that will go to the book for this next release. So that's great. Thank you, Matt, for that. But I don't think we want to worry about introducing all this change in the next 2 or 3 dev days and block a release. Okay, great. I don't know what this is. Is this something that we would land like today or tomorrow?
I think that's ready. It's not super critical.
Okay, cool. Is this something that's part of the V2 API? That's a simple chunk?
It's not part of the V2 stuff, but it's simple enough, and I think it's just kind of leftover follow-up stuff from a while ago that we just didn't get to.
Okay, cool. This looks like V2 stuff, so we'll tag this. And John, if you think any of this stuff that I'm tagging that you're doing is actually more work than would support a release next week, let me know. Okay, we have talked about this a little bit, I think, in Slack. Is this something we can review and ship for V15? Let me drill closer. Does it have test coverage? It does. Okay. Let me run a couple more tests. Willie, have you done some pre-reviewing here? Can you give some thoughts on the
Yeah, so they're
maturity
adding
of
a
this?
field. Yeah, it's pretty close, but it's also adding a field that like this is basically disabling the extensions like the old PR. The only difference is this one, like it's like disable extension operation. So when you enable that, it just doesn't reconcile or allow any extensions at all. And it seems like they want to use this just to get rid of the default extension. So it might just make more sense to add a field to explicitly disable it. If you like look at the comments of the PR, but yeah, it's pretty like close already. It's just I'm not sure if that's what they exactly want, and they might need to refactor it.
Okay, cool. We can take it offline. My first pass is that I think disabling the entire extensions is actually more reasonable than disabling a particular extension. So,
Yeah,
but
but the issue is
I haven't
like,
done. Go ahead. Sorry.
oh, sorry. Just like the issue is because you can specify extensions using a different field. So now there's going to be a conflict between 2 different fields where you can disable extensions, but also like specify a list of extensions. And they have this webhook check that checks if that list is empty, and saying like you can't set any extensions if this field is enabled. So it just kind of creates like two fields that kind of conflict with each other. So that's kind of an issue, I think.
I see. That sounds like an issue. So you're saying that you have in your review process pointed the way towards a more elegant solution for the same.
Yeah, like someone from
Goal.
their company, I think, also just suggested that first, if you look at the comment, but yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. So we will not tag that as 115. John, you again, yay or nay on this one? Oh, it looks like it's approved.
That's
and it's
also a bug
validated.
fix, so it's not super
Okay,
critical we
cool.
land that before.
Got it. So I'm not going to worry about that. Great. I'll tag this actual PR. I will tag this PR, right? Yeah, let's prioritize. If we've got improvements to the docs, let's get those into the book. I think that's great. Got a couple of whip. And I think we're far enough down. Willie, is this something that we want to prioritize? Allow setting resource group name in Azure Managed Control Plane template?
It's been a while since I looked at it. I think it was ready for review. I'm not sure though. Let me look at that. Look, can you click on it? Because it's been I think I just opened it and then like haven't looked at it since.
Did I click? Okay, there we go.
Okay, looks like it just needs review and people haven't looked at it yet. And it should be pretty simple.
Cool. I will tag it. Am unaware of this. Remove projected service account volume for workload identity. John.
Yeah, this was, I think, the V cluster thing where they're trying to run CabZ in a V cluster. I can't remember exactly what the setup was there. But I think this is at least blocked on tests where these changes are making our tests fail.
I see. Cool. I will not tag it. I think we've got enough stuff. So any additional, I mean, this one was this actively reviewed? I know I've seen him at some of these office hours. And I just see your avatar here, John.
Yeah, so I think at least where I left off on that was, so I have that other PR open with the bug fix to at least kind of get over the regression that we had.
Yeah, and that landed, right?
No, that's still
this
open,
one.
I think. Yes, that one.
Matt, do you recall your review?
Did I review that one?
Here?
So evidently I don't review.
GitHub thinks you and Willie did.
Oh yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you want to look at it, there's not a lot to it.
So what's the difference between this and the other submission?
So this one uses the same mechanism that we had before we started requiring Azure Cluster Identity for everything, where basically you can specify a subscription ID and then that's set in an environment variable in the controller pod versus
I see.
making.
So it's a different way of solving the same problem.
Right,
So
just
rather
without
than
any
allowing,
API changes.
I see, got it. Okay, I think I prefer this one. Okay, but as you pointed out earlier, it's a fix, so we don't have to worry about that. So I feel like just in terms of load, like this is a sufficient that number of PRs that we would ship with 115. So I'm going to go ahead and tag this with 115. And looks like that worked. Is there anything not on here that we want to ship with 115? How many more PRs in the V2 flow are there, John? Or are they all here at this point?
Outside of this one that's open, I think 4-ish, give or take a couple.
Okay, cool. So yes, let's work together to get those in the queue. We're 3 minutes ahead. We have 3 minutes left, so maybe I can quickly just do a couple of minutes of issue triage. Is there anything? Everything's last week. Anything we want to surface? This is interesting that this is here because that support should already exist. I'm curious what scenario is not working. Okay, cool. I think we're good. All these things at the top are not super new, so there's no surprises, and some of these are being actively worked on. So I feel comfortable giving folks 1 or 2 minutes of their time back. Thanks,
Jack.
everyone. I'll upload the recording.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Jack.